You smile whenever they expect you to. You swallow anger, disgust, indignation. You swallow each of these feelings like bitter pills you're forced to take every day. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself what this is really costing you? Have you noticed how every time you suppress your voice, it echoes even louder in your head at night, keeping you awake? How many more times do you plan to say it's okay when clearly it's not? The world says you're kind, that your calm is admirable, but do they really know what that calm is costing you? Does anyone notice how much of your truth you suffocate just to meet other people's expectations? What if I told you that this exaggerated kindness, this quiet passivity, is slowly draining your will to live? That every fake smile, every yes said out of fear of conflict, is a small death of the person you could have been but never dared to become? That pain lives in the anguish you carry when you're alone, in the bathroom, the car, anywhere away from the eyes that demand your constant emotional availability. It's in the unbearable weight of guilt you feel just for wanting, for a second, to be heard instead of always listening. How long do you think you can keep existing just to please before it completely erases who you really are? How much longer will you accept that your peace is worth less than the emotional comfort of others? And what if you don't do anything about it? What if you keep repeating this pattern year after year? What version of you will be left after every piece that actually matters has been sacrificed in the name of this poisonous kindness? Ask yourself this: who does your kindness truly serve if it costs your very existence? If it robs you of the ability to feel real joy? If all that's left at the end of the day is emotional exhaustion and a heavy silence? Maybe you've already felt that something is deeply wrong with the way you've been living. Maybe you've already noticed your emotional life has become a minefield where you step carefully so as not to upset anyone. But how long can you maintain that insane balance, pretending everything's under control, while your soul is silently begging for the performance to stop? Be honest now. What are you afraid you'll discover if you stop smiling when you don't want to smile? What's your biggest fear if you dare to challenge expectations and let go of this mask of goodness that only serves everyone else, while leaving you completely unprotected and vulnerable to silent emotional abuse? Because the truth is this: your kindness isn't just hurting you. It's killing you slowly, consuming every authentic part of you, leaving behind only a trail of resentment hidden behind a smile that never reaches your eyes. And if you don't start questioning this now, maybe you'll never have another chance. Maybe one day you'll wake up and realize you don't even recognize yourself anymore. So tell me, are you ready to understand why you must urgently learn to become dangerous in a way no one ever taught you? You were taught that being a bitter person meant staying silent, that love meant tolerating everything, that being a good human meant letting things slide, smiling, even when everything in you wanted to scream. But that teaching didn't come from your soul. It came from a world terrified of people who know how to impose themselves, from a system that only works when you're predictable, docile, and willing to sacrifice your truth for everyone else's comfort. And maybe that's why you're emotionally drained. Because your kindness became a leash, and you've worn it for so long that you forgot you were ever free. You weren't born to be consumed by the need to please, but you learned to adapt. You learned to stay quiet so you wouldn't disappoint, to give in to keep the peace, to smile in order to preserve relationships that deep down always require you to disappear. And this repetition, this submission dressed up as gentleness, carries a price no one else sees. But you feel it in every unexplained headache, every wave of anxiety, every night you lie down with the aching sense that you're living a life that was never really yours. On the outside, you might seem composed, but inside, you carry cracks no one notices, and maybe even you refuse to see. Machiavelli once wrote that a ruler who wishes to survive must at times learn not to be good, not because cruelty is the way, but because those who refuse to see the world as it is become prey. And you, if you continue trying to always be good, will remain the target of those who see your softness and use it as a weapon against you. Because where there is excessive kindness, there is often a lack of boundaries. And where there are no boundaries, abuse finds room to quietly move in. And here's the hardest truth. No one will return the strength you keep giving away. No one will protect you from what you allow. No one will teach you how to defend yourself if you keep sabotaging your own integrity just to remain likable. Because the world doesn't respect those who sacrifice too much. The world exploits them. And you know this. You felt it in the moments you tried to be understood and were discarded. In all the times you gave too much and received emotional crumbs in return. You don't need to explode to reclaim your space. You don't need to become cold, cruel, or harsh. But you do need, urgently, to stop offering your vital energy as a constant sacrifice on the altar of one-sided relationships. You need to understand that being dangerous, in this context, means becoming someone whose presence commands respect, not with shouting, but with clarity. Someone who says enough without feeling the need to explain. Someone who looks into the eyes of a manipulator and silences them with unshakable calm. This is the psychological error that makes you easy to dominate. You fear losing connection more than you fear losing yourself. And as long as that fear remains in control, you'll stay a prisoner. A prisoner of conditional love, external validation, and the idealized persona you created to survive. But now, you know. And knowing is already a rupture. It's the first step toward no longer being emotional prey for a system that feeds on your self-denial. If this spoke to something real in you, help me keep this channel alive. Like the video and subscribe. I can only keep going with your support. Because these reflections don't please everyone, but they awaken those who are done pretending. There's a kind of pain that never shows up in words. It hides in your habits, in your quiet compliance, in the way your body tightens when someone crosses the line, again, and you choose silence. You tell yourself it's not worth the fight, that staying calm is the mature thing to do. But let me ask you something most people never dare to confront. What if that maturity you cling to is just trauma in disguise? What if your silence isn't wisdom, but submission rooted in fear? The moral systems we inherit are often weaponized against our integrity. You were likely taught to be kind, to be helpful, to be forgiving, and those are noble traits in theory. But somewhere along the way, you learned that love means sacrificing yourself, that boundaries are selfish, that being nice is more important than being whole, that the approval of others matters more than the truth of your emotions. And this distorted morality, what Nietzsche would call the slave morality, has turned your compassion into a cage. You walk through life trying to be good, but what that really means is that you've been conditioned to be harmless. You're predictable, agreeable, pliable, and that makes you easy to exploit, easy to overlook, easy to discard. Because people don't respect what they can control. They don't cherish what never resists. You think your politeness protects you, but it's precisely what's making you invisible. You're not living. You're being tolerated. And that should terrify you. Your nervous system wasn't built for this kind of daily betrayal. Every time you smile when you want to scream, something inside you fractures a little more. You suppress your needs, your instincts, your truth, and the cost is cumulative. The body remembers what the mind denies. That chronic fatigue, that tension in your jaw, that low-level anxiety you can't explain, that's your inner warning system begging you to stop betraying yourself. And yet, you keep going. Because you've convinced yourself that it's the right thing to do, that it's noble to suffer quietly, that being a good person means swallowing every disrespect, every manipulation, every micro-abandonment. But at some point, you have to ask, good according to whom? Good for what? If being good means erasing yourself, then maybe it's time to stop being good. It's time to become someone who others think twice before crossing. Someone who can be kind without being weak. Who can love without losing themselves. And that means cultivating the kind of presence that commands respect. Not from aggression, but from unwavering clarity. From the kind of silence that isn't passive but powerful. The kind that doesn't ask for space, it claims it. That doesn't beg to be seen, it is seen. Because here's the truth. People will only treat you as seriously as you treat yourself. If you keep giving away your power in the name of peace, you're training the world to ignore your boundaries. And no one is coming to rescue you from that pattern. You either step into the discomfort of transformation now, or keep shrinking into the comfort of being used. This isn't about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you were before the world trained you to be so damn agreeable. Before you thought your safety depended on being liked. And if that version of you feels unfamiliar, it's because you've buried them under years of smiles that weren't real. So ask yourself, who are you when no one's watching? And more importantly, when will you stop hiding them? There's something deeply disturbing about how easily people praise your kindness. They applaud your selflessness, your ability to stay calm in chaos, your willingness to forgive what was never even apologized for. But what they're really applauding isn't virtue, it's your absence. The fact that you've learned to disappear emotionally so others don't have to face discomfort. They don't love you. They love the version of you that never challenges them. The version that absorbs tension so they don't have to carry it. And slowly, without even noticing, you start to believe that this is who you are. The emotional cushion, the peacemaker, the one who always understands, no matter the cost. You're not weak. That's the mistake most people make when they talk about emotional exhaustion. You're not weak. You're overused. And the most tragic part is that you did it to yourself in the name of love, peace, and being good. You were never taught to measure the weight of what you carry, only to endure it in silence, only to smile and say, it's fine. But it's not fine. You've normalized a pattern of internal collapse, of emotional self-erasure, so that the world around you can remain unshaken. And this is not maturity, it's psychological slavery. There's a reason your relationships feel imbalanced, a reason you're often the one who gives more, texts first, apologizes even when you're the one hurting. It's not because you're more evolved. It's because you're afraid. Afraid that if you stop being convenient, you'll be abandoned. Afraid that if you show the full force of your needs, people will leave. So you cut parts of yourself off, piece by piece, until what's left is palatable enough for others to digest. But in doing that, you've become emotionally malnourished, and your soul is starving for authenticity. This is what no one tells you. There's a kind of rage that lives inside people who are too kind for too long. It's not loud. It's not explosive. It's quiet, steady, suffocating. It shows up as bitterness you can't explain, as sadness that has no specific cause, as a detachment that grows stronger every time you say yes when you desperately wanted to say no, and eventually you stop trusting your own emotions. You gaslight yourself. You call it overthinking, but it's not. It's your nervous system screaming for boundaries you keep denying. The irony is brutal. You've been conditioned to believe that being difficult is wrong, that saying no makes you selfish, that asking for space is a betrayal. And so you became exactly what they wanted. Easy. Easy to love, easy to manipulate, easy to forget. But you're starting to feel it now, aren't you? That faint pulse beneath the numbness. That quiet whisper in your chest that says, there's more than this. That's not delusion. That's your original self, the one you buried, trying to breathe again. Here's the twist most people never see coming. You don't attract toxic people because you're unlucky. You tolerate them because you've been trained to ignore your own emotional instincts. You've internalized the idea that it's better to be useful than respected. But the truth is, usefulness without boundaries becomes servitude. And if you don't unlearn that now, you'll spend the rest of your life being chosen for what you offer, not for who you are. You don't need to become cruel. You just need to become complete. That means embracing the part of you that's willing to be misunderstood in order to be whole. The part that doesn't fear walking away. The part that knows deeply that your presence is not a favor. It's a force. And it's time they learned that too. There's a precise moment, often quiet and terrifying, when you realize the exhaustion you feel isn't from working too hard, but from constantly betraying your own limits. You've worn your flexibility like a badge of honor, thinking that being adaptable made you mature, evolved, spiritual. But deep down, what you've been calling understanding is often just fear. Fear of losing people. Fear of being seen as too much. Fear of what happens when you finally stop being the one who absorbs the chaos and start becoming the you. You were never meant to be endlessly accommodating. You weren't born to be a mirror for everyone else's needs, while your own reflection fades into the background. That eraser didn't start with you. It was modeled, praised, rewarded. You became who they needed you to be, hoping that in return, they'd protect what was left of you. But they didn't, because people don't protect what they assume will never fight back. They don't preserve what constantly offers itself. The guilt you feel when you try to set boundaries isn't yours. It was implanted. It was taught. And every time you override your discomfort to maintain harmony, you deepen the wound. You tell yourself it's not a big deal, that you're strong enough to handle it. But resilience without self-respect isn't strength. It's self-abandonment dressed in discipline. And sooner or later, your body will make that truth impossible to ignore. The fatigue, the tight chest, the emptiness you can't name. They're all evidence that your soul has been asking for space you refuse to claim. Let's be honest. If they only loved you when you're quiet, agreeable, soft, do they love you? Or the version of you that doesn't disturb their comfort? And if every relationship requires you to shrink, how long before there's nothing left of you to offer? You weren't made to be someone else's emotional safety net. You weren't made to be endlessly useful, endlessly forgiving. That's not love. That's emotional servitude wearing the mask of connection. Here's the thing most people won't tell you. The only people who are truly threatened by your boundaries are the ones who are benefiting from your lack of them. So when you begin to change, don't be surprised if they resist, if they call you selfish, cold, different. That resistance is proof that your shift is real, that you're no longer available for emotional currency exchanges that bankrupt your identity. And that's growth. That's liberation. That's the start of becoming whole, not in theory, but in practice. To reclaim yourself, you don't need permission. You don't need them to understand. You need to stop asking questions and start making decisions. You need to risk being misunderstood in order to be real. Because the truth is, your integrity is not up for negotiation. Not anymore. Not after everything you've survived, just to remember you exist. You were never here to be pleasing. You were never meant to be invisible. And if the world told you otherwise, maybe it's time to stop listening. Maybe it's time to stop bending and start becoming. Because the version of you that never says no, that version is tired. And somewhere beneath that fatigue is the self you abandoned. The one who remembers what it means to take up space without apology. Let them meet that version. Let you meet that version. It's about time. You spend your life making things easier for everyone else. You anticipate needs, you lower your voice, you soften your words. You become smaller in the moments that require expansion. And when it hurts, you call it maturity. When you feel empty, you call it humility. You've convinced yourself that restraint is power. But deep down, you know you're not choosing silence. You're trapped in it. You've made your peace with being unacknowledged, as long as you're not abandoned. But let's not confuse peace with survival. What you're calling peace is often just learned submission. This is what it feels like to live behind the mask of the good person. You are respected, but not heard. Needed, but not seen. Valued, but only for what you offer, not for who you are when you stop performing. And somewhere along the way, you stopped asking for reciprocity. You stopped expecting fairness. You told yourself, this is just who I am, when what you really meant was, I don't know how to be anything else without losing everything. That's not identity. That's conditioning. And it's the reason why, even in full rooms, you often feel like a ghost. Let's be clear. This has nothing to do with being inherently kind or gentle. This is about survival patterns rooted in fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of rejection. Fear of being labeled too intense, too emotional, too hard to love. And so you compensate by becoming agreeable, emotionally predictable, easy to be around. You think this earns safety, but what it really earns is invisibility. And slowly, the world starts forgetting that you were ever supposed to be something more than convenient. That's the paradox of the overly good. You give so much that people forget you have needs. You show up so consistently that people assume you don't get tired. And the worst part? When you finally say, I'm not okay, they look at you like you've broken a sacred contract. Because your identity was never built on honesty. It was built on usefulness. And when you stop being useful, they stop recognizing you. You weren't born to serve everyone else's emotional comfort at the expense of your own wholeness. You weren't created to be chosen only when someone needs something. That isn't love. It's convenience. That isn't connection. It's consumption. And the longer you stay in that role, the further you drift from the person you were meant to become, someone complete, not just compatible. You need to understand something with brutal clarity. The pain you're carrying isn't just from being hurt. It's from being silent about the hurt. It's from watching yourself tolerate what your soul wanted to burn down. From nodding along while everything in you screamed. That's the wound. Not just what they did to you, but what you kept allowing, hoping your endurance would eventually earn you love. It won't. Real love doesn't require you to disappear. Real presence doesn't demand your silence. And real connection doesn't grow in places where you're not allowed to say no. So stop calling it loyalty when it's really just fear. Stop calling it kindness when it's avoidance. Stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to be whole. Because here's the truth. The version of you that makes everyone else comfortable is killing the version of you that could change everything. And no one else will save that version. No one else will give her space. Only you. Only now. There's the part of you that's been screaming beneath the surface for years. Not in volume, but in ache. A dull, persistent ache that shows up in the quiet moments. When the call ends and you're left drained. When you hang up with someone who only talked about themselves. When you do the right thing and still feel hollow. That ache is not weakness. It's a signal. A pulse of truth rising from the version of you that's been buried under years of accommodation. And yet, every time it speaks, you shut it down. You call it overreacting. You tell yourself it's not worth the fight. But how many of those moments will it take before you realize you've made a habit out of silencing your own soul? You've been taught to believe that being easygoing makes you a better person. That flexibility is virtue. That not causing waves is the highest form of love. But that's a lie. A lie sold to people like you, empathic, reflective, afraid of being seen as a burden. So you play the part. You laugh when things hurt. You excuse behavior that cuts deep. You forgive without an apology. And somewhere along the way, You stopped believing you were even allowed to ask for more. You became a master of emotional self-erasure. You learned to feel disappointment and turn it into understanding, to absorb betrayal and frame it as growth, to swallow rage and rename it patience. But every time you do that, you drift further from your center, from the raw, unfiltered version of you that still remembers what it feels like to say no without guilt, to walk away without explanation, to exist without apology. But it's not too late. The ache you feel, that's not just pain. That's memory. It's your true self, remembering who you were before you were trained to be agreeable. It's the warning light that flashes every time you shrink to fit into relationships that don't deserve you. And if you ignore it long enough, it becomes something darker. It becomes depression, numbness, resentment, a slow rot of the spirit that no one sees because you still smile, you still function, you still serve. That's the tragedy. The world doesn't notice people like you until you collapse, until the weight of pleasing becomes too much and something inside snaps. But you don't have to wait for that. You don't have to burn down to prove that you've been on fire this whole time. You can reclaim your power in silence, not by shouting, but by refusing to explain, by pulling back your energy, by becoming someone who doesn't need to justify their boundaries. You see, the person who's dangerous isn't the loud one. It's the one who no longer needs permission to exist. The one who's not afraid to be misunderstood, misjudged, even disliked. That kind of person radiates something deeper than approval. They radiate presence, and that presence becomes untouchable, not because it fights, but because it no longer fears confrontation. It no longer needs to prove its worth by how much it can endure. So stop asking yourself why people don't treat you with respect. Ask yourself why you keep staying in places where your value is conditional, where your silence is expected, where your pain is inconvenient. You're not too much. You've just been living in rooms that are too small for who you're meant to become. And the truth is, your future self is already watching, waiting to see if you'll finally choose her, if you'll finally choose you. There's a version of you no one has met yet, not because it doesn't exist, but because you've buried it under layers of performance, accommodation, and emotional restraint. This version doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't need to be liked. It doesn't crave peace at the cost of integrity. It's the version of you that once roared in childhood before being taught to apologize for the sound. And now that roar has been replaced by silence, but it's still there, compressed, coiled, waiting, not for chaos, for truth. You were taught to fear your own power, conditioned to associate assertiveness with arrogance, boundaries with coldness, presence with threat. So you diluted yourself to be digestible. You smiled to be safe. You softened to be accepted. But all of that adaptation came at a cost. The cost was your aliveness, because a soul that never expresses itself fully begins to decay, slowly, quietly, beneath the mask of harmony. But here's what they never told you. Being dangerous doesn't mean being destructive. It means being clear. It means being so anchored in yourself that no one can use confusion as a weapon against you. It's knowing your worth so deeply that manipulation loses its grip. It's walking into a room and not shrinking, not because you want to dominate, but because you've remembered how much space you're allowed to take up, how much truth your body is designed to carry without apology. You don't need to become someone else. You don't need to unlearn kindness or trade love for cruelty. You just need to stop abandoning yourself every time discomfort arises. Stop abandoning yourself when someone disrespects your boundary. Stop abandoning yourself when your truth makes someone uncomfortable. Because your soul isn't asking for peace. It's asking for presence. And presence requires courage, the kind of courage that doesn't flinch when misunderstood. the kind that remains whole when others try to reduce you. Machiavelli understood that power isn't found in force, it's found in perception. And perception is rooted in consistency. You don't need to raise your voice to be taken seriously. You just need to stop lowering it to make others comfortable. You need to stop explaining your worth and start embodying it. That's what makes you dangerous. Not aggression, but unshakable clarity. This is the rebirth you've been resisting. Becoming someone who no longer tolerates half-love, half-truths, half-living. Someone who doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't explain. Not because they're heartless, but because they've finally come home to themselves. And when you reach that place, when you step into that presence, the world responds differently. The chaos doesn't disappear, but it stops being able to enter you. People treat you with the respect you model. Relationships shift. Silence becomes strength. And for the first time in years, you feel untouchable. This isn't a performance. It's a return to the part of you that never needed to be fixed, only remembered. The part that doesn't fear confrontation because it's not here to fight. It's here to live, fully, deeply, unapologetically. So don't be afraid to be dangerous. Be afraid of what happens if you continue to live as though you aren't. Because nothing is more dangerous than a soul that's forgotten its own weight. And nothing is more holy than the moment it decides to carry it again. Most people don't notice the shift right away. They just sense something's changed. You speak less, but your silence carries weight. You smile rarely, but your gaze no longer pleads for approval. And when they try to push the old patterns, manipulation masked as concern, guilt dressed up as love, you don't flinch. Not because you've become cold, but because you've finally understood. The version of you that once needed their validation no longer runs the show. Something deeper, older, more dangerous has taken its place. Not dangerous to others, dangerous to the system that once kept you small. You stopped playing the martyr. You no longer confuse sacrifice with connection. You see clearly now that the good one is often just the one most easily controlled. The one who says yes with a knot in the chest. The one who confuses emotional starvation with loyalty. And what used to feel like virtue now feels like betrayal. Not of others, but of yourself. You look back and see how often you tolerated what felt wrong just to avoid confrontation. How often you endured in silence, hoping your pain would earn affection. But pain is not currency. And you've run out of reasons to trade yourself for closeness that always left you emptier. This is the cost of awakening. You begin to lose comfort in places that once felt like home. You no longer fit in dynamics built on your silence. You start walking away from conversations that drain you, from relationships that require explanation, from people who only show up when they need something. Not because you've become better than them, but because you finally remembered you're not less. And when that remembering lands, it's not loud, it's steady, like gravity. The world starts to respond. Some will get defensive, others will disappear. But the right ones, they'll stay, they'll adjust, they'll meet you where you are instead of trying to pull you back to where you were. Because when you become whole, you attract relationships rooted in truth, not performance. And that's the real shift. You no longer chase connection, you embody it. And in doing so, you create a life where being yourself is not a risk, but a requirement. This doesn't mean you stop loving. On the contrary, you love more fully because you love from wholeness, not from hunger. You give without bleeding. You forgive without forgetting. You show up, but no longer to be used. You speak, but no longer to convince. You exist, not for their comfort, but for your own liberation. And the energy that once went into being liked is now invested in being real. That's the true danger. You're no longer afraid to lose what never saw you in the first place. Jung said that wholeness is not achieved by being perfect, but by integrating what we once denied. And you are living proof of that. You've gathered the parts they told you to hide, the anger, the desire, the refusal, and turned them into pillars. You've redefined strength as softness with boundaries. You've made space for silence without shame. You've stepped into presence so complete, even your stillness speaks. And now you stand where your past self never thought possible. Not healed, not finished, but awake. Fully, fiercely awake. And if this journey has taught you anything, it's this. The most dangerous thing you can become is exactly who you are. No edits, no apologies, just truth. Finally unmasked, finally whole. If this reflection resonated with something you've lived, if it mirrored a truth you've always felt but never heard spoken, take a second to support this space. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and help this message reach someone else who's still buried beneath their own silence. Because this isn't just content, it's a mirror. And some mirrors change everything.